Right, well, good evening and welcome to Crapper. I don't know if it's evening where you are, but it is where we are. Um, Tonight, the old team, Tim Appleton, Peter Turner, Sean Hall. It's customary for the person who's speaking to introduce themselves first, obviously. So tonight we're going to be looking at Aqualung by Jethro Tull, and it's been heavily trailed by Sean on the Instagram account, which is great. And we'll see what we make of it. Obviously, this is all live, so we don't record it live at least, so we don't know when we're going to go, where the conversation is going to take us. Um, shall we start with opinions of the album, um, and then we'll go on to related matters. So, Peter, would you like to start us off? What's your opinion of Aqualung as an album? You know, in relation to the Jethro Tull oeuvre,
Uh,
how do you think it stands or sits?
it's well, I mean, it's their biggest seller, and it is kind of one of their best, I think, really. But I have to say, I'm not a big Toll fan. I think what it is that they sometimes have questionable taste, and I've run into that so many times and thought, I don't like this. I don't like the way they do this, or I don't like the way they do that. For me, though, this album, I do like.
Mhm.
I do like this album, but and the one that follows, Thick as a Brick as well, I think it's a good run. But at the same time, it's not an album I play very often. And I'm not sure what that is. There's a few albums like that, which are just albums I appreciate, but I don't actually ever think of playing. I don't know if either of you feel like that. Otherwise, I do think it's a good album. Yeah.
We should do an album by taste at some point,
Yeah, I
since you've
don't think.
mentioned taste. Uh, yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether a great album is one that you play a lot.
Hmm.
We've sort of mentioned this before. I mean, I sometimes think that the albums that you play most are the ones that are not very good, and you feel the need to keep coming back to check how bad they are. That's more the case for me. Um, but yeah, so I mean, Sean, are you a fan of Aqualung in relation to the Jethro Tull catalogue?
Yeah, I think Aqualung and Thick as a Brick, I'd agree that they're their best work. I do like this. I've enjoyed listening to this because it's just made a change to in some of our recent chats. We've done quite a lot of sci-fi, haven't we? So it's quite nice to come back to more mundane themes of homelessness and religion and God and stuff like that, which is actually quite heavy. But I do like it. I like the sort of there's elements of folk rock in there, and obviously there's a sort of hard rock style. Yeah, I do like it. I think it works as an album. Whether it's a concept album, I don't know. Can we answer that?
I mean, that's the question for me. I think that we're going to perhaps keep. I imagine we might keep coming back to that, or at least when I was listening to it, I kept coming back to that question. Apparently, it's a controversial question. From the point of view of the band. But I mean, there's all sorts of things to say about that. But I think maybe we could come back to that later. Yeah, I mean, I'm Jethro Tull famously, and I use that word ironically. Jethro Tull were my number one played band on Spotify last year,
Ooh.
but they're not my. I would say they're not my favourite band.
Hmm.
So I think that's interesting. I mean, I think there might be a connection between the two things. The fact that they're not my favourite band means that as I said before, I keep sort of coming back to them, and I think that they are um, a band that you can. I don't know. It's like the. It's. I was thinking it's a bit like Cubism. There's an artistic reference for you, Sean. Uh, that in a sense, like it's sort of it's made them a band that's made up of parts, and the parts never seem to sort of. Each of the parts, in a way, are more interesting than the whole, in a sense, or that's not a good description of cubism. But let's say the parts sort of are overrun the whole. In some sense, the parts are bigger than the whole, sort of thing. Paradoxically, um, and so I get that feeling about them. I can't quite work out what it is that they're doing, on any particular album or on any particular day. And I think that's true stylistically as well. And that's certainly, I feel that about this album. It's like you put it on and you think, oh, they're doing this now. Why are they doing this? You know, and
Mm.
I have that thought a lot when I'm listening to Jethro Tull. They're doing this. Why? You know. But I think, yeah, it's a. If you go to Spotify, like the top five, you know, most played tracks by Jethro Tull are all from this album, right?
Mm.
And I think that's not an accident. I think it is a great album, and I agree with you, Sean. This and Thick as a Brick are really like the sort of the high watermark of their career, I think. And I think that yeah, it's not an accident that these are the most popular tracks because I think this is actually their most popular album, isn't it? And for some reason, it accidentally almost became a big hit in the States, right?
Yeah.
Which we're going to come back to maybe in Turner's
Yeah.
Turntable.
Yeah.
But it seems like these are the like there's two of the tracks, Aqualung and Locomotive Breath. I think are like the tracks that they always play, from what I've heard in on rock radio in the US, right? I mean, what those tracks have in common, I don't know, but they are hard. They are sort of hard rock tracks, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I think this is probably their most hard rocking album. Would you agree with that? I mean, again, every album by them is different, but this is like a rock album, isn't it? And so maybe
Yeah.
that's more appreciated in the States. I don't know.
This is the first actual classic rock album we've looked at, isn't it? This is not I don't think this is a prog album. That you couldn't because it doesn't have the connectivity that you get on other albums as well. The thing about the album though is it dares to be different, doesn't it? In that it's quite deep. The themes here are deep. This isn't light-hearted stuff at all, and that suggests to us a prog album, you know, or a concept album. But actually, as the band claim, and they've said many times, Ian Anderson, there's no intention here for this to be a concept album. But I do wonder whether that's entirely true. I wonder whether it started out as an idea that could be big, you know, like the Aqualung idea really could have been a concept album. But I think maybe as lots of bands suffer, you know, it's a bit like the Sgt. Pepper story, isn't it? We start out with an idea and it's like, oh, let's just do tracks. So because it really does draw itself towards the idea of a concept here, I think. But I really don't think it just plays out. Maybe they just abandoned the idea and then pretended it wasn't, you know.
Well, it's two concept albums in one, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the weird things about it.
Right. Yeah.
They start with Aqualung, and then they cross-reference that in other tracks. But then on the first side, there's things which don't fit into the concept so much. And then when you get to side two, all of a sudden they're discussing God.
Yeah.
And apparently that's that's cross-referenced throughout the whole of the second side of the album. So. That is very weird, isn't it? I mean, why would they? Perhaps that the idea for Thick as a Brick, which Sean mentioned earlier, came from that. Like, oh well, in that case, let's do the let's do the whole thing then, right? But I don't know why they were so cross about it. All right, good. Well, look, let's have you got some stats for us?
Well, it's it's kind of a bit statless, this actually, this one, but we can talk about the American idea. And I mean, to sort of generally give you the picture of it, it's March 1971, whereas things move very quickly, don't they, in the late 60s? And by 71, you've got Jethro Tull recording this album in an old church with Led Zeppelin in the same building at the same time, who've bagged a better room, essentially, doing their fourth album. I mean, four. How could they possibly have got to four in the space of what is that, like 3 years? I mean, 68 is the first album, isn't it? I think it's incredible.
69, I think, isn't it?
It's just amazing. The pace is just incredible for these bands. Anyway, it's generally people think of it as a concept album. The band absolutely say it's not a concept album at all. I think that this was the band's turning point, though, and it usually takes a few albums, doesn't it, to get to that point with these bands. It really was, you know, for their career. It's their best-selling album still to this day. And Anderson claims, Ian Anderson, the flautist, guitarist, and lead singer, that this was the turning point that this was inspired by Roy Harper, a lot of it, and I know he was a big fan of Roy Harper, and Burt Yanks as well. So they're very sort of giving in their influences here, which is this is exactly what this is how it plays out, and this is where we get our inspiration from for this. It is split into two parts, the album as well. Aqualung, the first part, and then side two is My God, which is an interesting title, I think, for that. The idea of the American influence, I think, really, it's interesting. Some of the language. It sounds deliberate, I think, that they are actually trying to reach an American market here, because they mention the word candy, from a laugh, candy from a laughing baby's mouth, which I just think seems so contrived. I don't know people now who use the word candy, and also the word brush cigarette ash from your pants. That does not scan for 1971 England, unless you're trying to get into the American market. So I think possibly there is a bit of an attempt there.
But I think actually, candy scans, doesn't it? Otherwise, it'd have to be sweeties, which would just has no universal resonance.
Yeah, but pants is unforgivable.
But I think the whole of the world calls, trousers pants. We're the only ones that don't.
Yeah, but they're a UK band.
Yeah, true, true. But are you saying that they dropped in a reference to pants
No, I think Ian
to
Anderson
appeal to an American audience, sell more copies in America?
I think he was sitting on Preston platform in his underwear.
Oh dear. So, well, I think that that thing about Roy Harper, again, Ian Anderson says, "Oh, Roy Harper was an influence," but to me, that's just a meaningless statement because I don't know, no idea what any of this has to do with Roy Harper. It's like one of those just weird things that like an artist might say in order to, oh yeah, I was just listening to this when I was doing that. It's like, well, I don't know how that's relevant. I don't know what we're supposed to make of it. All right, very good. Well, Shaun, would you like to give us some?
Yeah.
Have you got anything on the cover?
Peter's going to hold up the CD. Alas, where my vinyl copy is, I don't know. I've had it, but anyway. Okay, so I'll be brief. It's a watercolor painting by Burton Silverman, an American artist and illustrator. Now, the plot will thicken as we go on. Okay, so it was inspired by Ian Anderson's missus, his then girlfriend or wife, because they were observing a lot of the sort of the homeless around London, particularly around the Embankment. So it spurred an idea to have obviously this character of Ian Anderson's Aqualung. Obviously Aqualung connected with his raspy sort of breathing. So Ian Anderson's girlfriend knew of this guy, this artist, and thought he'd be perfect to illustrate this cover. There's a bit of contention about whether Ian Anderson posed for the portrait. Burton Silverman says that he posed in the studio and there were Polaroids taken of him, but whatever. The cover was produced.
Sorry to interrupt. That is
Sorry.
weird. That is weird because it looks exactly like Ian Anderson.
Well, it does, and there were isn't it on the back cover? I think there's a illustration of Ian Anderson. Is that right? Yeah. Well, I think there are other portraits that he did of Ian Anderson. So yeah. So who knows? Who knows whether it's Ian Anderson or Burton Silverman? Anyway, the paintings were done, and they're in a sort of semi-impressionist style for those of you who are actually bothered by this stuff. And Burton Silverman was paid a flat fee of around about $1,500. Basically, I rather like all artists, isn't it? If somebody offers you some money, you just sort of take it, don't you? But anyway, what basically happened was Burton Silverman's daughter during the 1980s, this was, she was at college, began to realise that all the campuses in America, all the students were wearing Aqualung t-shirts. There were Aqualung mugs. They had the album. They had posters on their walls. And so basically, Bert and Silverman began to sort of think, hang on, I think I've been slightly done here, you know. And obviously the CD came out and so on and so on. It'd been reproduced. You know, it's a pretty iconic image, I guess, or certainly in America. I don't know about over here really, but so he he wrote to Chris. He wrote to he went straight to the horse's mouth, so to speak, and he thought, oh, Ian Anderson seems a nice guy. Maybe he'll appeal on my behalf. And he received a rather a curt response, I suppose, bordering on naff off, basically. And he told him to speak to Terry Ellis, the a producer at, well, Tull's producer manager at Chrysalis, and I think he really got short shrift. And we still don't know. I mean, I don't think he's been offered any cash or any bonuses. Um,
Well, if he's listening, perhaps he could get in touch. Let us
Yeah,
know.
or maybe we should start a crowdfunder for him or something like that. These starving artists. Um,
Do
anyway,
you?
the original.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on, Tim.
Do you like the cover? I mean, are you
Personally,
aesthetically?
yeah, I mean, it's quite. Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind it actually. Can I? It's something theatrical about it, and I think there is something theatrical about this album. Really, it's a sort of portrait, isn't it? It's a
I mean,
I don't know. It's
I, yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I think it reminds me of the black paintings by Goya.
Mm,
Now, you mentioned
yeah, yeah,
impressionism, but obviously Goya was pre-impressionist, but
yeah,
I mean, I live in Madrid, right next to the Prado Museum, where the black paintings are, right? And I don't know if people know what they are, but they're like basically they were sort of private paintings that Goya did,
hmm,
or they assume that Goya did. For just sort of on his days off sort of thing, and they are all about like representing mad people in the streets and tramps, and they have a sort of Dickensian feel, if
yeah,
you have an English mindset, and they're sort of they're very ugly, and I suppose this isn't that ugly, but it does seem something. It does seem there's something expressionist about it to me.
yeah.
Proto-expressionist. I don't know what you think about
It's slightly sinister, isn't it? It's
that.
yeah.
Mm.
Sorry, Peter.
I think because obviously you're about to ask me what I thought of the cover.
Mm.
Um, I I think the thing is about it is it sets up something interesting, this front cover, because you just it's an unusual idea for an album, isn't it? At all, really. I mean, most people are at this time anyway. You've got like Starship Trooper, and and the everything's very sort of up in the air, isn't it? And then you've got someone writing about homeless people, and
Yeah.
that's it. I find really intriguing, and in a
Mm,
way, I kind of feel like this album, although I do like the album, if they just sewn it together a bit more, that front cover would be
mm,
really would really stand for something. I'm not
mm,
really sure. It doesn't stand for much on the album. That's all I'd say about it. But I do like the
mm,
cover. It's quite
mm.
dark, isn't it? The cover, but
Yeah.
it does set up some excitement. I think
Mm,
you're
Well,
intrigued.
that takes us back to the question of whether it's a concept album again. So I was
Yeah,
right in my prediction. We're going to keep coming back to that question probably every two
yeah.
minutes, because I think that is an important part of
yeah.
it.
Mm.
Sorry, Sean,
Well,
had you
no,
finished?
no, no. I was just going to say that the original got pinched, so it's out
Oh,
there somewhere. Apparently, there was a burglary at Chrysalis head offices, and yeah, it got nicked. One of the things that got nicked. So
God.
yeah, it's out there somewhere. But I think the original album was embossed, wasn't it? I recall. Does anyone remember? So I
I
don't know
can't.
why. Had a sort of textured, bobbly
Yeah.
look.
They just don't bother on these.
No, no, you can't reproduce the embossing, can you?
No.
But yeah, no, that's it. I've said my piece.
But that's like they used to take their time, didn't they, with album covers back then?
Mm,
There was an
definitely.
album cover, I think, by was it the third album, I Steal, I Span, which cost so much to produce that they actually lost money on the album.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thanks a lot. So let's go to the tracks then now. Um, Now, I think that let's start with Aqualung, of course. If you like, I'll kick this one off. I mean, I've got something strange to say. I think this is a I think this is a heavy metal track,
Hmm.
right? So that would be that's my thesis, which I'm going to try and defend. No, I mean, I think you know it sounds the main riff sounds to me like Black Sabbath. So the thing is that this is if I may, this is Birmingham music, isn't it? I mean, it's
Right.
not an accident that Tony Iommi was in the band for a while, you know. Um, and actually, I wonder whether that's again why that it's popular in the US because um, that Birmingham music is popular in the US, isn't it? You know, Black Sabbath, this, um, you know, Led Zeppelin,
ELO.
Judas Priest, ELO,
Yeah.
Napalm Death. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's a sort of very. It reminds me of like Black Sabbath, and I think it's quite even like when it goes into the quiet bits, which you think, oh, this is like folky, but actually, this there is a sort of folkiness in later British heavy metal as well. You know, it sounds a bit. I mean, it sounds a bit sort of. Well, first of all, we have that tritone thing in the guitar
Yeah.
part, which the Black Sabbath used, like da 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 da
Yeah.
da da. That penultimate note is called the tritone, and then the chords actually follow that as well, follow that tritone. So like this is a very sort of like early heavy metal thing, but then when it goes into the quiet bit, that also is reminiscent or sort of well pre-reminiscent of later again Nwabum stuff, new wave of British heavy metal stuff. I mean, it reminds me. The whole track reminds me a little bit of a track which you guys might not know, "Revelations" by Iron Maiden. I mean, this sounds like it could have been a sort of Iron Maiden track. I think if it had been played in a slightly different, you know, in a slightly more aggressive style. That's ironic because actually Iron Maiden did cover it. Were big fans of Jethro Tull, and they did cover a Jethro Tull song off this album, but it wasn't this one. It was "Cross-Eyed Mary," which was they used as a B side. And yeah, so that's my opening gambit, as it were. I think this is hard rock, early heavy metal, even where it goes, you know, sort of moody. I think it's got
Mm.
it's early heavy metal. What do you guys think, Sean? Sean, what do you think of that
Yeah.
thesis?
Yeah. I mean, I like it.
Mhm.
I just actually something I wanted to bring up was the guitar solo. Martin Barr, or is it Martin Barre? Anyone know how?
I think it's
Barr,
bar, probably. Yeah.
Barr. Okay, okay. Well, he related a story in 2015 about laying down the solo. It's Peter's territory, really. I'm jumping in Peter's grave here.
Mm.
But he said there was sort of a vague air of threat that when you were recording solos, you're only ever allowed two takes, or Ian Anderson would whip out his flute and knock off a flute solo. So he felt under real pressure to nail this guitar solo. So he was already feeling the pressure. And he said that going back to Led Zeppelin, you know, they were doing the Runes album. And he said he was about to record his solo, and he said Jimmy Page walked into the control room, and he was jumping up and down and waving just to say hello just as I was about to record my guitar solo. He said, now in those days, if you didn't get a solo in two takes, that was it. It might become a flute solo. So he said, here was Jimmy waving like mad. And I'm thinking, I can't wave back or I blow the solo. So there you go. Poor Martin. I mean, he pulled it off, didn't he? Because it's voted, I think, isn't it, one of the best in rock history, something like that. I mean,
Really?
I don't know these
Uh,
guitar magazines,
What?
but yeah. So
oh,
so there you go.
well, they've
It
got.
always reminds me a bit of I don't know if you watch snooker, but it reminds me of the old snooker theme, not Pot Black,
Oh,
but sorry, that sort of
What,
guitar,
Aqualung?
the guitar solo.
Oh, the
yeah, it's
guitar sound.
the sound, yeah.
Sorry, yeah, the sound of it. I don't know. Anyway, um, it's a slightly unsettling song, isn't it?
Why?
I always feel a little bit unnerved by the line where he says eyeing little girls with bad intent, and I don't know whether I'd put it on at a barbecue or something like that with,
That was a
you know,
different. It was a different time, wasn't it?
different time, wasn't it? But actually, I mean, it does take me back to, I think everybody who whoever used to hang around their hometown probably knew a character like Aqualung. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember the tramp that hung around Brentwood.
Jumbo
Um,
Whiffo.
Jumbo, well, his name was Don, wasn't it? I think, and he
He was
used
a
to
jazz
walk.
musician as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he used to walk around singing Chattanooga Choo Choo. I don't know if you go. I won't do it. I won't do my impression.
No, don't.
No, no. But yeah,
Well,
I'll leave it there. I think I've said enough.
okay, so we've got the we've got we got the Birmingham connection there, and also with Jimmy Page, and also we've got
Mm.
this um, thing about the guitar playing and the guitar sound, a hard rock thing. I mean, Peter, what do you think of this track? You a fan?
Yeah, there's several things about that. The Martin Barr guitar solo is really good, actually. And I think he's kind of a bit of a clumsy guitar player, isn't he? But I think he picks the right notes. I think that's what it is the solos work, but because he's just a very spirited player, I think. And so he suits the sound brilliantly, I think. What's interesting is apparently I think maybe the lyrics were written by Ian Anderson, his partner. Part of it was written by her. I think probably the lyrics. After seeing, as Shaun said about the Thames Embankment, sort of homeless. The riff obviously is like it's like the 21st century schizoid man of Jethro Tull, isn't it? This is the one thing they are known for. That riff, definitely. There's some lovely irony in the phrase "feeling alone, the armies of the road." I love that. The
Yeah,
idea that there are, I mean, in Victorian times, they were so many people who were dispossessed, weren't they, and homeless. It was like armies of people really searching the roads. But I like that kind of idea of this loneliness, which is he is alone, but there's a lot of him, who are also alone. I quite like that. And the snatching of the rattling last breath with deep sea diver sounds is such a great line. The aqualung, keeping him alive, this sort of thread to the world there.
Can I just say
Yeah, go on.
the lyrics I think are completely brilliant. I mean, I think Jethro Tull, whatever you think of them, I personally think they have the best lyrics of all the prog bands, really, bar none. I think Ian Anderson is the best lyricist of the entire period, really. So I mean, you know, there's an uncanniness in these lyrics. You're right about the
Yeah.
the
yeah,
figure of Aqualung and stuff, and that's what Sean was saying about it made him slightly uncomfortable because it's supposed to make
Yeah.
you feel uncomfortable. But I just think Ian Anderson is so good with creating images and rhyming and stuff. Anyway,
Well,
that's my
yeah.
what Sean was saying, about it's just not appropriate, some of these lyrics, because they're not. Because I mean, the second track's actually about a prostitute. But the thing is that in a way, the fact that he's eyeing little girls with bad intent isn't an issue for us, is it? That's just the reality of this man's life, and it wouldn't matter if it came out now. That's still a significant line, and I think that's why he doesn't shy away from saying things like that. But I think at the same time, it was different times.
oh,
There's one
it's
thing
not as
that
bad
sorry,
as she was just 17. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Because you are
Well,
directly
yeah,
implicated in that line, aren't you, as the
yeah.
listener? So yeah. Anyway, go on.
One last thing I was going to say about it was it's when it goes into the acoustic part and Ian Anderson plays the guitar. I think it's him playing, isn't it? Because he's a good guitarist and he sings along. I always think he would have made a fantastic solo artist. Like, I mean, he's a great writer of songs, and despite Tull, actually, he writes some wonderful solo pieces on this album. Then they just drop in. Suddenly they just go into this quiet section with him on his own, really, and I just think. Yeah, I like to hear those sections because him for me is what Jethro Tull really is. he kind of is the mainstay of it all, I think.
Yeah, he's also the tramp, isn't he? I mean, wasn't he always the tramp? I mean,
He
that's how,
dresses.
you know,
Yeah,
that's what his whole persona is in the band. It was, even before this album, right from the beginning, really.
yeah.
I mean, you remember the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus?
Mm.
Do you remember we all sat and watched that one night when it finally came out at Christmas
Mm.
time in Brentwood? That was a grim night. And but yeah, he's got that. It works on so many levels. I mean, just as a sort of, as you say, like Peter, as a sort of like as an artistic product. I think this an artistic construction. This all works so well. He's the tramp. He's identifying with the tramp. We're not sure if we want to identify with the tramp or not, because there is. If I can do my can I do my pedantry corner?
Yeah.
Because there's a sort of this is a long-standing motif, like in philosophy and social theory, that like you have these outsider figures who really are actually, they represent the people themselves, the people as such, and this was always like a big dilemma in, for example, in the history of Marxism, because Marxism is based on the confrontation between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. And Marxists were never really sure what to do with this third category, which was like everybody else, who are like, they're poor and they have nothing and they're completely, down on their luck, but they can't, they're not, they don't have a strong enough culture to form part of the proletariat, as it were. And then when Lenin comes along, he says, right, actually, we need all those people as well. We need the peasants. We need this third force, actually, and we need to sort of articulate it together with the proletariat. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to do a revolution. And then Mao takes that even further, right? So there's always this like subversive category, even within the history of Marxism. And it was actually went back to Hegel, who called it people without history, and he thought it was like the Indians, and his examples were the Indians and the Africans, but the people who don't actually fit in even into the historical dialectic. They're always there, but they have nothing, and they are, slightly sinister, slightly, and they have a slightly obscene side. This is the sexual thing again, like I think that's not an accident that line is in there, or that Cross-eyed Mary is a prostitute, because from the point of view of like the sort of the social dialectic, they are completely excluded, exteriorized. So anything's possible at that point. They could mean anything that's not normative, and I actually think that sort of carries on a little bit in folk music itself. I mean, English folk is sort of aimed at the people, and the people is not the proletariat, right? It's just like the sort of the masses, who have nothing and they can get nothing, but they're always there, and they are really always the sort of in the end the agent of emancipation. And I think so there's a sort of connection there with the folk influence as well, which is obviously present in Tull. All right, good, but it's a lovely track, isn't it? This, and it's also the other thing I want to say before we move on is it's a complex structure, isn't it? Right, it's not just hard rock,
Yeah.
but it's sort of their first prog rock track, don't you think? In the sense that it goes through time changes and things, and it has like theme and variations, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
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 All right, good. Anything else on this track? What does Aqualung mean?
Well, I think that was sort of coined, wasn't it, with his partner? I think they came up with this phrase for this tramp they saw. But isn't it like a life support, essentially? Like this is a guy whose breathing is so croaked and difficult that, it's like he's holding on to life itself. That kind of imagery, I think. But it is an odd one, isn't it? Because it's a sea, a sort of maritime, reference, isn't it, really? Which is odd.
Did Jacques Cousteau invent the Aqualung?
He might have done.
Are either of you experts on Jacques Cousteau? No.
Maybe he did his own cover of Aqualung.
Underwater.
French. Yeah.
Hello.
All right, good. Now let's move on to Cross-Eyed Mary. I think we could probably fly through these tracks fairly quickly. This is another. I think this is another hard rock song. It's quite chromatic. Like it's a da, 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 like
Yeah.
this is sort of again unexpected. I think. Um, and again, you've got this, as I said, this sort of sexual reference, which is the sort of the obscenity of the social deviant. Um, yeah, do you like Sean? Do you like this track?
I do like it. Again, it's just slightly unsettling to blast out on the stereo with family members about. Um, yeah, I think it's got quite a nice riff. It's got quite a sort of evocative opening with that sort of
Yeah.
flute sound and the use of the mellotron. Um, is the buzzer going to sound for mellotron? Um, Ian Anderson said it was a schoolgirl prostitute type, like we all know. Um, he said she lives a wretched existence, offering services to the dregs of humanity, and now he reckoned this is a slight connection to side two that he said you have to see the spirituality in everyone. So he's not saying what a dreadful character she is. He's writing it with a sort of level of sympathy. But he also said it was a fun track, which was hey, So yeah, I do quite like it. Yeah, I think it's a kind of the partner track to Aqualung, really, isn't it? So
Oh, that's interesting.
I
Yeah.
Yeah.
always
So,
feel.
does that mean you think that this is? Do you think we're still in concept album
Yep.
mode at this point?
Yes, could
Yep.
be. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to go back to my pedantry corner again, I'll get back in my pedantry corner. This idea of like the people as absolutely excluded goes back to the Romans, and the Romans had a name for them, and it was called Homo Sacer, and it was basically people who were completely outside on the social margins, but they were also like religious figures. Like it was that if you touched them, you got cured, and things like
Mm,
that. So this is perhaps again the connection between spirituality
Mm.
and the completely socially marginal. So I think you're onto
Yeah.
something there, Sean. Peter,
Well,
are you enjoying this track?
yes, I was just going to say though, you've just not reminded me, but just inspired me that, of course, the clergy who have always been sort of beyond reproach by society are also the poor, aren't they? So there's always been this link between sort of godliness, isn't there, and poverty, actually, which I suppose the two sides of the sound probably deal with. Anyway,
St.
the yeah I
Francis, St. Francis of Assisi.
mm. Oh,
Oh,
Peter's
yeah, I
frozen.
really love him, lovely one.
Yeah.
um so
you love his
so
work.
love his work. Second album in particular. The thing is with this, Sean's absolutely right. This is like, come on, we've got a concept. Because when you hear the first track, you think, oh yeah, this is about a tramp, and it's very thoughtful, sort of thinking through like his life and names places he goes and all that, and it paints this picture. Cross-eyed Mary does exactly that as well. You've got another character with a strange name, of course, because none of them have their actual names, do they? Because they're all kind of undercover, and they've got these sort of street names. And there's loads of description of things she does. She dines out on other people's money, and Aqualung gets mentioned, which
Mm,
just drives on the concept. I'm thinking, first time I heard this, it's like, great, I love this. As I love a story and all this stuff.
mm,
I think brilliant, I love it. And I what I really like about this track, apart from the story part, is that the verse isn't built around sort of chuggy chords. It's actually a proper riff, isn't it? It's a properly written part, actually, the guitar for this, and
mm.
the guitar and bass sort of twin together, and then it goes into the chorus and it becomes more sort of sort of average rock. But I think it's very well written. I do like this song. I do like it. And of course, it mentions another character who is the jackknife barber. So it's all building up at this point.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, there's a sort of series of vignettes here, isn't there?
Mm.
And as was referred to earlier, like this is part of his wife. Was it Jenny Anderson, who was a photographer and was hanging around
Mm.
taking photos of tramps? I mean, apparently there was no problem with that.
Do you
Um,
mind? Do you mind?
I mean, can I sort of like interject here and ask what you think of their playing? Because it's come up before. We were talking about Martin Barr's guitar style. Now, Peter said that he plays in a rather sort of awkward way, but he gets the notes right, which I think is like an interesting comment. And Shaun said that he was wildly intimidated by Jimmy Page hallooing him during his solo. Um, I find them. Uh, I think what I would like to say about this album is that I find the sound of it a bit weird, and I think that when you get to Thick as a Brick, it's much more fluent. You'll note that at that point they've changed a couple of members, right? And
Mm.
I find Martin Barr sort of like his guitar playing kind of works for what Tull are, but I find him a bit clunky. And I find the sound clunky here, and it's very clunky on this one, I think. And but in particular, I find the drumming very clunky on this album. I don't know if you think that that's fair. I mean, I think he's a good drummer, Clive Bunker, but he's not as doesn't seem quite as versatile as Barrymore Barlow, who according to John Bonham was the best drummer ever. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the studio, you see, which is there were two rooms in this studio, one of which was nice and small and damped the sound down, and they had this bit. Basically, it was a converted church, and they had the large part of this, and they were never happy with the sound. But there was basically nothing they could do about it. They tried their utmost to get the sound, but none of them liked the sound. Apparently, this album.
Had Led Zeppelin bagged the small room?
Yeah, they bagged the crypt.
I always think here's my picture of Clive Bunker. Can you see?
Oh my God,
lovely.
There he is.
That's
He's
good.
got his moustache. I always think he's got a rather woody sound.
What do you mean by that?
It's a what I'd call a late 60s drum sound. It's kind of a Ginger Bakery sound, who he liked. He did like obviously all the usual suspects, the jazz, the world of the jazz drummer, for example. But I do think I think he is a good player. He's a very gutsy player, and I put him in my woody category. It's a very woody sounding drum kit, but yeah, it possibly perfect for that sort of late 60s rock, and early Jethro Tull, perfect. But perhaps it's a bit like in Yes with somebody like Peter Banks or Tony Kaye. Could they handle the more complicated music? I don't know. I not knocking him. I think he's a good drummer, really good drummer. But yeah,
could Peter Banks have played on Tales for Topographic Oceans?
Well, could he? Could he do it? Could he have done it? The great unanswered question of prog rock.
No.
Have you ever heard that quote, Shaun, from I think it was like someone, I think a journalist said to John Bonham, "What's it like being the greatest drummer in the world?" And he said, "I don't know. Why don't you ask Barry Barlow?"
Well, I didn't know that actually. So,
I shouldn't go on about Barrymore Barlow because he's amazing, Barrymore Barlow, and Clive Bunker is very good. But it's that the bit in, for example, I hate to go backwards, but that bit in Aqualung where they go. After this sort of, I don't know, when the guitar solo's done, and he's doing that fast four. I think, oh God, he's using all of his arms here, isn't it? It's a bit a bit like we were saying about Nick Mason. He's a bit Nick Mason-y, but he's a better drummer than Nick Mason. But it's still I feel like on this album he's sort of reached the end of the limit of his versatility, musical versatility. But that might be a bit unfair.
I think though it's the same with every conversation we have about music. I mean, it's this kind of unwritten thing underneath, isn't it? Which is there are, excuse me, other people, people who aren't male, but there are blokes who have a go at playing instruments, aren't there? And then there's people who actually know how to play instruments, and I think that you can really tell the subtle differences between. I mean, I hear it more with drummers than anything. I think really, which is you just think. I don't know. I don't even know what the drum part is. Didn't even stand out. Nothing. It was like background. That's when you've got someone who's just sort of having a go, maybe.
Yeah. But on the other hand, Jethro Tull is full of people never played their instrument before, and they were just sort of strong armed into it by Ian
Yeah,
Anderson. So,
yes, yeah.
so I don't know how
Yeah.
that came about. I mean, apparently Jeffrey Hammond had never played the bass before,
Yeah, yeah.
and never picked one up. And then I also read an interview with Ian Anderson once where he said, "Oh well, when I interviewed Martin Barr, you couldn't really hear what he was playing because his guitar wasn't plugged in, you know." And he said, "So I just assumed he was all right, and then invited him to join the band." And Ian Anderson, Ian Anderson himself is like a flautist, but he always said, "Oh, I just
Yeah.
picked up the flute because I thought I'd have a go at that,"
No, you
he's
do.
like you do, but
Nice.
he's an incredible musician, Ian Anderson. But
Mm.
I don't know how the rest of them had to, they just had to make do, I suppose. Um,
Dear, oh dear.
anyway, so let's go on to the first of the acoustic vignettes, Cheap Day Return. I would say that I always feel a sense of happiness when this song comes in because I think that I'm actually not a big fan of Cross-Eyed Mary. I think it's all right, but like I think it's to me it's slightly fillerish in comparison to the opening track, which I really like a lot. Should have said that before. But then when this track comes in, it's a really lovely little tonal break, isn't it? And I think and the fact that it's short, I think is brilliant, really. I mean, and again, they keep coming back to this thing where they're doing a rock track and then a little short folky interlude, and that carries on into the second side. So again, it's like, hang on, is this still a concept album? It's like I can't listen to this album without asking myself every 2 minutes whether I'm listening to a concept album or not.
Yeah.
It's like a sort of like an identity crisis or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel stupid asking this, but do you like this song, Peter?
Well, yeah, I absolutely love this song. I think it's beautiful, and it just shows you what a strength Ian Anderson is. Imagine they'd be flailing around without him. I mean, this is him just writing beautifully, and I love the guitar part. His voice is great. The lyrics are really sort of just that lovely kind of vague story that he's told, apparently about visiting his critically ill father, and then sitting on Preston platform thinking about it. And
In his
what's
in
the
his
nurse?
underpants.
Yeah, sitting in his wide front, spilling ash on him. And I think it's great that he's used that sort of moment, but it breaks the concept. I mean, it does. And it's an interesting sort of psychological thing, this, isn't it? Which is you kind of you're willing on the concept, aren't you, all the time? But they didn't say it was a concept album. It's not like they've let you down, but for some reason you like the idea of it and you want it to work. But this really does break from that, unless your concept is just small vignettes about people's lives. This is a complete break, but it is a lovely little tune. I love this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sean, you like this one?
Yeah, it is a really nice tune. It, it, Ian Anderson said the song would have been longer, but the train arrived. So, anyway, but yeah, I love it. I love it.
I wish the train had arrived slightly earlier during Cross-Eyed Mary. Yeah, it's there aren't enough short songs, are there? I mean, in the world, like I think if a song goes on for a minute and a half, it's almost impossible for it to be bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, next song, Mother Goose. Now, I should say this is my favourite song on the album. This is one of those ones, they call them deep cuts now, like really great songs that are kind of
Yeah.
like, just they're buried in albums, but they were never really hits. I think that this is one of those. This is a sort of album defining track, even though it's not, it's not at all a famous track. I always think of OK Computer by Radiohead. The track I like on that most is Let Down, which isn't a big hit or anything, but that's the track that I enjoy most. It's not even a famous track. So Mother Goose for me is one of those. I love it, and of course I love that sort of folk funk. It's sort of like a la Matty Grows by Fairport Convention. It's weird, that sort of overlap between funk music and like sort of rhythmic English folk guitar tracks. Um, Sean, do you like this one?
Yeah, I love this track. This is one I've played in the car with the kids, and they've gone, what did he say? Chicken fanciers, Dad, and hats off that he got that in there, into the lyrics. Yeah, it's great. Um, it is a fun track, isn't it? It's just got a nice feel and warmth to it, which is,
Hmm.
quite nice following on from Cheap Day Return. Um, I love the bit where he says, I saw Johnny Scarecrow make his rounds in his jet black Mac, which he won't give back. He stole it from a snowman.
Yeah.
That kind of reminds me of a character I used to know in Housestead, a friend of Frank, who Peter met once. He was a bit of a Suffolk character, actually. But yeah, there was this guy with a very ratty look and a flat cap called Dave Pannell, and he was a poacher stroke fencer, and there were quite a few characters lurking around Housestead, still are really, but yeah, it's a great sort of great lyrics, and a visual piece for me as well. Yeah, I love
It's
it.
so it's
Brilliant.
so well observed, isn't it? I mean, his
Mm,
his knowledge of this world is
mm,
uncanny because Ian Anderson is, completely posh, isn't he? I mean, he's
yeah.
not someone who's hung around with these people, but he observes it so well. Like you say, the stolen coat
Mm,
from the snowman, and I love that little moment where he's down at the bowling green.
mm,
I put the hole in the holes or
mm,
whatever he says at the bowling green. It's so British, this, isn't it?
mm,
But it's
mm,
also this wandering aimlessness of these people, isn't it? They're just everywhere, and there's nothing to sort of contain these people. There's no
mm.
theme really for these people. They've nowhere to go. There is a nice line in it as well, which is I saw at least 100 schoolgirls sobbing into handkerchiefs as one, which I always think that's probably to do with the Beatles breakup, which
Ah,
is 71, 70, however you cut it. I always think that's probably a comment on that, actually, in the way that
mm.
King Crimson did the what was the family thing? What was their song on Lizard?
Uh, oh yeah,
No,
indoor
what?
games. No, no, Happy Families.
How Many Families, which is about the Beatles, isn't it? I think it must be a reference to that because you've got to remember how significant the Beatles are to bands like Tull and every band at that time, despite the fact that they had their own careers. You're talking like nearly a decade, aren't you, of music really before this. So
Although it's a bit anachronistic. I mean, unless the girls have been there for a full year crying into their handkerchiefs. I mean,
no, but time is meaningless in these songs, and
fair
he's
enough.
just plucking things out of the air. I think this is though another great example of what Toll do so well, and what I love about bands. What I love about a lot of these prog bands is that they know how to mix up beautiful moments of sweet melody and the rawness of blues.
Mm.
I just left a little gap there for you. So the rawness of the blues, which is great. And this is a really good example. You've got a lovely it's got a folky twist to it, but it is also a bit bluesy. It's a bit rocky, but in a folk way. And then the 100 schoolgirls, part, which is really lovely and just calm and, delightful. And again, it's just got this whole coterie of tramps. Again, he's
Yeah.
introducing more and more people all the time, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Can I just say I like the idea that you mention the blues and then you go into like standby mode, like you go into
Yeah.
um,
Well, I want to give you time.
so I think that's a joke for people who enjoy our podcast, the podcast version of this. Yeah, I mean you're right. It's a very now that you come to mention it, it's a very British thematic, isn't it? All of this, it's a very British sort of album and very British scenes that we're dealing with it. I mean, yeah, God, pigeon, not pigeon, chicken fancier. What's that?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm.
And yet, ironically, this is their big. This was their like big breakthrough album in America, the one that
Mm.
everyone remembers in America. So what? I mean, what do American people make
Yeah.
make of this? Must be like this is what is this world? I mean, what he's doing is again, I think in this track is he's doing this thing. to get back in my pedantry corner. He's doing this thing, Aqualung's just wandering around, isn't he? And he's invisible basically to all the good people of London, all the different social groups. So he's sort of traveling around all these social groups, and from their perspective, he's not there, but he can see all of them, of course.
Yeah.
So this reminds you of this sort of theme of like the godlike status of the outsider. Sorry to labour the theme, but I think it's definitely a factor here. And I mean, what an interesting thematic. I mean how not a lot of bands would have had the sort of intellectual concentration to have pulled this off. I think so.
No.
This is a really.
I think
Yeah.
it's interesting about the crossing over to America with this is probably the worst album in terms of actually getting the Americans to understand what the hell you're talking about. And it reminds me of when the Arctic Monkeys first went to America with that first album. And there's a line in it, could all go a bit Frank Spencer.
Right.
And it's like, who the hell? I mean, lots of people here wouldn't even know who that was, and they have this sort of magical connection to the past. But the Americans wouldn't have a clue what that was, would they?
Yeah, that is weird, isn't it? Although now they can just check it on YouTube, can't they?
Yeah,
They can
true.
they can watch Frank Spencer hanging off the back of a van,
Yeah,
on
roller
skates
skating
to their
roller
heart's
skating.
content. All right, brilliant. Let's go on to Wond'ring Aloud. Now, I don't have much to say about this track. I love it again. Beautiful little vignette. I think, folky vignette. Are you aware that there's a long version of this? A sort of almost 8-minute version of this track. And that allows me to say that this album, I think, could have been a double because they did so much stuff. They had so much outtakes, and it was all brilliant. I mean, I don't know if you've heard any of the sort of like in the deluxe edition of this album. But I mean, the tracks that they left off it were just it's one brilliant track after another. They were really on a roll here. I think the idea that they were all stuck in this studio, sort of like in the church, like freezing and feeling, trying to avoid Jimmy Page, belies the final product. I think. Yeah, I mean the 8-minute version of this goes on a bit too long. I mean, I think probably someone said, "Can we just cut that down to?" To a minute and a half. Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Yeah. Do you like this one, Shaun?
I'm just going to say I digress, but I just had a visual image then of I just wondered if the toilet facilities were shared, because wouldn't it have been awkward if Ian Anderson had popped into the urinal and Robert Plant was standing there? I can't imagine that would have gone well.
Yeah, because you see, women don't have to worry about these things, do they?
Imagine sharing a bog with John Bonham
after a particularly heavy night. Yeah, it's a lovely little sort of acoustic bridge, isn't it? It's supposed to be about his girlfriend, isn't it? I think. Is that right? His wife, his girlfriend. So having a romantic kerfuffle. Can I put it like that?
They broke up when they broke up. I think when their marriage broke up when he went to Switzerland to avoid paying tax. So maybe there was a political element to it.
And wasn't there a follow-up song to this? Am I right? Wondering.
Well, I think it's sort of again edited out of the longer version. I think.
Right.
I'm not misremembering.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, Peter, you like this one?
No, I don't like this one, and I wish it could sound more dramatic and you were more shocked. I don't find this interesting at all. For me, this is obvious filler stuff. I think it is anyway. It's the first thing I don't like on the album, and it doesn't bode well because you think, oh, if I don't like this, what's coming next then? But I just think it lacks any dramatic tension. It's like a wheel that keeps going round and round in circles, and it's like it's not going anywhere. But I don't think it's particularly interesting either. It doesn't compare to something like Cheap Day Return, which is chirpy, to the point. It just seems a bit, Wond'ring Aloud is probably the best name for it, really. It's just Wond'ring Aloud would have been better, I think.
Yeah, well, you should hear the long version.
Yeah, well, when you said there's a long version, I thought, well, thank God.
Longer than this.
Yeah, no, I don't like it.
Sorry, I've got a cold. Just just in case anyone was wondering on the podcast what that sound was, someone playing their nose. All right, good. Split, mixed opinions there.
Yeah.
Mm.
And but again, I think to me it proves my thesis that if a song's short enough, it doesn't really matter how
It's
bad it
gone,
is.
isn't
Well,
it?
it does to me.
Apparently, it does. I thought you sounded really angry. I thought you were gonna, you were angry that I'd even asked you. That's how much you, you disliked it.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, let's go on to the final track of the first half, which is Up to Me, right? What do you think of this track, Sean? Do you like this one?
Yeah, it's okay. I've written acoustic rocker here.
Hmm.
I suppose the thing again is that just quoting Ian Anderson lyrics, really, that the thing that stands out for me are his lyrics on this again. I don't want to steal them for everyone, but the yellow-fingered smoky girl is looking up at me, and then he's got another quote again. He's got, well, I'm a common working man with half a bit of bread and jam, and if it pleases you, I'll put one on you, man. They're just sort of nice
Yeah.
little pen portraits, really, of people that you can kind of really relate to. Actually, it just really reminds me, not that I knew much about 1971, but I was born in 1971, and you kind of look back at that era, and it does sort of sum it up. So it comes back to me: is this a concept album? I don't know. Is it a concept album about the year 1971? I don't know, but yeah, it's okay. It's a good closing track, I guess, to side one,
To side one.
in my
Yeah.
opinion.
It's funny how you sort of like, I mean, I was praising the lyrics earlier, but actually sometimes I sort of don't really read lyrics that much. I used to when I was a kid. Now I just put albums on and I just let them,
Mm.
sort of like wash over me. And I've always thought that line where he says, "I'll put one on your man," I always thought he was saying, "I'll put one on your fan." And so I imagined a
Yeah,
tramp. For
yeah.
some reason in my mind, this is the kind of like, weird things that you think in your mind. I imagine a tramp, with a small amount of excretia, putting it on a fan and allowing it to, you
Right.
know, to sort of spread muck all over the surroundings. I don't know why, these things occur to you. But anyway, or me. Um, yeah, I mean, I think this is slightly anticlimactic myself, and I think the track's all right. It's not a great track, I think, but it kind of works all right. I like the middle bit.
Mm.
Uh, and I'm a common working man. Is that the way? I like that bit.
Yeah.
I think the sort of main bit is slightly uninteresting. I also think, and this takes us back to a very important question, which has come up once or twice, which is this a concept album? Because I think they should have done this as a rock track. Here I go. They should have done this as another loud track because it would have supported that. And dun, da, 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 dun, dun, da. They could have done it as a big closing number, and then it really would have closed, the first half. But as it is, it's a kind of downbeat arrangement, and therefore, once again, I'm thinking, okay, so this is just a little stopgap, and then we're going to go into the second half where it's all going to come clear. And so I don't appreciate the arrangement on this. I suppose I would say the other thing I wanted to say about it was I just love that. Is it the keyboard player? Is it John Evan who's doing that introduction?
Yeah.
I love that bit. I remember the first time. I think, at the risk of sounding nostalgic, I think that the first time that Sean might have heard that track was in my room at college. And I remember Sean jumping out of his seat at that point. But I mean, I might be misremembering that story, Sean. I don't know if I might have
It's
made up that
too long
anecdote. Does that ring
ago.
a bell with
Too
you?
long ago.
Yeah.
It could have been.
Yeah. Maybe it's just like the way
After
I wanted that anecdote.
after
Yeah.
5 pints of John Smith's, maybe, in
John
those
Smith.
days.
Jesus.
Peter, what do you think of this as a closer to side one?
Well, sorry to disappoint, but I'm not a fan of this track. I mean, this is two in a row for me. I think I love the opening because I think that although it's the keyboard player, I like to think of it as John Anderson, and it's like Aqualung is back because there he is with his kind of man. It's like a maniac or something, isn't it? Who's been released into a studio to sing a song. What's going on? I love the riff with the flat and fifth thing. It sort of reminds you of the Aqualung song riff as well in an acoustic form. I think you're absolutely right, Tim. It could have done with more treatment, this song. The problem is with this song I have is just the writing of it. I have no problem with the lyrics, the wimpy bar, pack the tennis club inside, trouser cuffs hung far too wide. All those lyrics are great. The problem is the song is not particularly interesting because it just feels like it's going round and round, like it can't quite seem to make a strong point. And then when you get to the bit you liked, I'm a common working man, it just it doesn't feel like anything's happening there. It's just, well, we're going to have to do something else anyway before we end this. I do like the ending though, the very ending of it. We have that tiny gap, and then the guitar and sort of flute end together. I think that's good. But for me, it's like lots of other tracks that I don't like. I know that there's an absolute corker coming next, so it kind of, you can put up with it.
So,
So you like the sound of the needle going into the final groove and lifting off.
The bit just before the song ends, yeah.
yeah, my favourite bit of Sergeant Pepper is that bit of studio chatter right at the end. For me, the highlight of the album. All right, yeah, good. Well, let's go on to side two. The other concept album. My God. Now, I don't. I think this might. I'll start us off if you like. I think this might sound a bit churlish, but this is the one track I really do not like on the album. This is the one track that I personally can't put up with, and I don't know why. I mean, why do any of us like the things that we like? But every time this track comes on, this is. I know it's a cliche, but this is a track that I skip. I mean, that thing about I skip this track. I always think when people say that, it's like a meaningless affectation. But in this case, it's really true. I skip this track. I think it goes on much too long. I don't think there's anything particularly interesting about it. Again, it's just got that sort of Black Sabbath type riff. But I mean, the thing, whatever you think about Black Sabbath, I have my reservations about Black Sabbath as a band. Obviously, I think they're great, whatever. But I think that they're a bit sort of. I find them a little bit monotonous as a band, for my taste, But I think they do bloody good riffs, and that's not really Jethro Tull's forte. And the other thing is that they always play this song. It's like every single gig they have to do this song as if it's, and people do seem to love it. But personally, I find that totally perplexing. I saw them in the Ipswich Regent, aged 16, I think, on my own, Jethro Tull. I didn't know any of their music then, but I thought, I should probably go and see this band. So I went, and they just. I remember this track. I remember being bored during this track, even then, age 16, and I'd never seen this band before. So this is like my sort of, what's the word, like Freud would call it, my primal trauma with this band is this song. And it happens to be on this album. So now, do you think I'm being unduly negative, Shaun? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't mind it. It is a sort of a Sabbath riff, isn't it? At the start, going back to Tony Iommi. I don't know. Was it hanging around in the ether? I am interested in the lyrics. For me, the section about where he talks about the bloody Church of England in chains of history requests your earthly presence at the vicarage for tea. I think that's amazing, actually. That's fantastic. So that's a highlight, but lyrically, I always think the flute section goes on too long. It's really meandering. I think it's very self-indulgent. I know he's got the section with the backing with the priests or the vicars, but but I kind of imagine that could become a sort of Andrew Lloyd Webber musical. That section they could be doing some high kicks or something to that flute solo. That could have been edited out, couldn't it? Really. But yeah, I do wonder maybe, although it's to do with the Church of England. Apparently, Aqualung was. You know this, Tim? I think it was banned in Spain, wasn't it? Is that right?
Um,
For a
yeah,
period.
I don't know, but a lot
It's
of things were banned in Spain.
Yeah. So
1971.
I mean,
Franco did. Yeah.
it's odd that they reference the Church of England. I mean,
Well,
they'd
yeah,
think they'd be going.
you think that Franco would be all up for a critique of the Church of England. I don't
So
know. I mean, I don't know how busy Franco's schedule was. I don't know. I don't know if they sort of like laid
did he
Jethro Tull
personally
albums.
listen to all these albums? And I
You
can't
say,
do his
does it
accent.
include a critique of the Church of England? Ah, well, put it in category B, A. Yeah, that was my
Oh,
impression of Franco.
yeah, yeah. Oh
Um,
dear. But so
yeah,
I mean, is it side two? Is it my God or is it my God? I mean, how do you say it?
Exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Has a
Sorry.
double meaning
Yeah.
that title, doesn't it?
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Well,
That's a good thought. Yeah,
yeah.
because for me, it's my God. By the way, I do like the
Hmm.
as you said, the monk's chorus. I mean, I think what that reminds me of is actually how funny they are. I mean, we haven't
Yeah.
talked about their sense of humor, but I mean, they are very funny, aren't they, Jethro Tull? There's a sort
Mm.
of Python-esque air about them, and they're very good at sort of slipping, excuse me, slipping jokes into their lyrics and
Mm.
into their sort of sound and everything. It's a
Mm.
real laugh. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
very again, I mean, that's a very sort of English thing, isn't it? I don't mean that to
Mm.
sound chauvinistic, but it's part of the English aesthetic, that, isn't it? But yeah, Peter, what do you think of this track?
Love this track. I mean, I remember the first time I saw it at the on the Afton Down festival video. I think they do My Sunday Feeling, but there is actually you can watch the whole of their set somewhere on YouTube, and they do My God, and it's so funny because at the start he's playing the riff, playing the little acoustic bit, and the crowd are not listening, and he says that I've actually started like that. It's really he actually says this is actually the start of the song. I think if you split Tull into two parts, which is those lovely short on this album, those lovely short sort of pastoral pieces with the guitar, and then the rocky stuff. This is a prime example of what how the rock stuff works really well for them, I think, because this has real tension to it. I think this song. I mean, because they slip from one to the other as well. He starts out, doesn't he, basically doing the whole song on the acoustic guitar, and then it just comes in really like corker sort of moment where it all floods in. I really like it, and I think that tension really builds as you go through. There's an interesting bit though where they split a line. It's an odd. It goes like this: "Strange, don't call on him to save." And then the next line is "you from your social graces," and I can never understand. When you don't see the lyrics and you just, like we go in and look at the lyrics for this, but I never understand what the hell he was talking about there. Um, but he actually just completely splits a line into two parts, and it suddenly makes sense when you see it. I think Aqualung and My God, though, if you look at the two sides of the album, I do think the Aqualung idea works better. I
Mm.
think the religion part is almost too much to be summed up. There's too much of it, and it's too ethereal, and there's too many ideas to sum up. But
Mm.
the idea of a sort of drifter, and these other crazy characters, you can just sort of dip in and out of that, can't you? You get this lovely
Mm.
sort of sense of these people. I don't think this religion side works as well, and I don't. I think it comes to a complete sort of bland
Mm.
ending actually on this album. So I think in a way with this new theme, it just doesn't work as well.
Mm.
There is a sort of parallel, isn't there, between Aqualung and My God, the track Aqualung and My God. I mean, it's like this is the important opening piece kind of thing, which
Yeah.
again, raises the question of whether this is a concept album. um, okay, good. So, completely different opinions then on that one. That's good.
Mm,
I suspect that most people will be with Peter on this one. Loving it. I mean,
yeah.
do you even extend that to the flute solo, Peter? Can you sit through that flute solo with a smile on your face, or
Yeah, I have no problem with that at all.
okay?
Seriously, I mean, I think I like the whole of that track. I think it's good. Yeah, I like it.
All right, just checking. Um,
For future
for
reference.
future reference.
Well, I remember you said something about a flute solo.
All right, great. Let's go on to Hymn 43, which is a strange title, isn't it? What are your thoughts on this one, Sean? Apparently, this was a hit
Yeah.
single.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Whereas it's another sort of partner piece, isn't it? Like Cross-Eyed Mary and Aqualung. Um,
Mm.
yeah, it's got that sort of hard rock riff. It kind of,
Mm.
I kind of sort of think he must be getting something out of his system, Ian Anderson, that, because you forget quite how stifling people's upbringings were, and you know, being forced to go to Sunday
Yeah.
school is not something in it, probably our sort of collective memory, but people were, and I just think all these sort of lyrics about, he's sort of railing against religion, isn't he? And he's sort of arguing that, God is everywhere. Well, I saw him in the city, and on the mountains of the moon, and it goes back to the idea that, even people like Cross-Eyed Mary are, not beyond redemption. That's that sort of thing. So it's sort of it's sort of following on that idea, isn't it? Really? Yeah, I don't mind it. Yeah, it's an okay
Quite,
track. Don't have a strong opinion on it either way.
it's quite rocksome, isn't it? It's quite a
Yes, it is.
rocksome track.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought about that
Mm.
actually. That is the I suppose that is the possible connection between the two sides. As you were
Mm.
saying, I
Mm.
was sort of mentioning that earlier, wasn't I, about how the sort of religious character of the outsider, and
Mm.
so maybe, as you said, like God is everywhere. So that's that could be a sort of connecting theme.
Mm.
I can't for the life of me work out why this was a single. I mean, you wouldn't have all the
No,
tracks on the album. You wouldn't think, well, let's release.
no,
Which one should
strange.
we release? Oh, hymn 43. What? You know. Peter, what do you think?
Do you think they wrote 42 other hymns before they got to this bit? The thing is that no, I'm not a big fan of this, to be honest. It's got a piano on it though. You finally
Mm.
hear the other the other member of the band play.
One of these.
It also sounds a bit like they're pushing the sound to breaking point. I don't know if this is what you were alluding to earlier, Tim. It's kind of almost crackling at this point. They're pushing it to the levels. I think it starts to get a little bit hissy on this. What I do love is the immediacy of it though, which is I love the way it comes in. There's no faffing around, is there at all? And it's straight. I know it's really weird. It's going to sound so strange, this, but you sometimes you hear a song and it's not anything like another song, but it's something about it that just reminds you of it. And it's there's a song by the Strokes, I think on their third album, possibly second album, Room on Fire, called I Can't Win, which I think is the last track on that album. And it has this chord at the start that just sort of starts. And it reminds me of that track. And I cannot think for the life of me why. It's got nothing like it at all. But it's that immediacy at the start. I do like that. It's straight in, there's no time wasting on this one. Yeah, I just think I hate the bit, "Oh Jesus save me." It's such a
Mm.
weak excuse for a sort of chorus, isn't it? That
Mm.
it's like, how do we end this line? A bit of, what do they call it? Sort of percussive guitar, and I'll shout, "Oh Jesus save me." I think it sounds like an unfinished song, to be honest.
Mm.
I can't remember that Strokes song actually, and it sounds like if I could, it wouldn't help us.
You'll have to
Um,
go and listen to it now.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a slightly, yeah, it's slightly for me. It's slightly fillerish, this track.
Yeah.
It sounds like the album's going downhill for me here, but I think it picks up again. But
Mm.
yeah, I like Sean's idea actually that there's sort of, again, like if Aqualung and My God are a sort of parallel, this one is a slight parallel with Cross-Eyed Mary. Actually, they're trying to keep the mood going here,
Mm.
rocking it up again. All right, what about Slipstream? Do you like this one, Peter?
Not really, no. I'm starting to I'm starting to realize why I don't listen to it very much.
Or not.
I think no, not really. The sort of theme sounds a bit like maybe going to heaven. That sort of idea,
Yeah.
sort of crossing over,
I
and
I have no idea what it's about, this one.
you press on God's way to your last dime. And there's another example, Tim, of dime. What the hell is dime got to do with anything? Anyway, as he hands you the bill, and you walk down the freeway. I don't know. No, not really. It's sort of I think it's a companion piece to Cheap Day Return, though. I think it's like Cheap Day Return Part 2, this almost. And then has those violin parts, doesn't it, at the end, a kind of taking us on some sort of journey or something. I think without Locomotive Breath, this album kind of has died for me. Actually, it's so nothing seems to be happening at this point in the album. So no, it's a one from me, Len.
The thumbs down from this reviewer. Um, yeah. Okay. Well, look. Let's go on to the next. Yeah. Well, again, we've got Aqualung. My God. Hit him 43 and Cross-eyed Mary, and then we've got Extreme They Return and Slipstream. So it's sort of it almost feels conscious, that, doesn't it? But yeah. Then we got Locomotive Breath, right, which is the big hit. I mean, I guess this is Tull's most famous track ever, right? I I like this one a lot. I think it's for the first like for the first time. I think this is a really good riff, right? In the sense that like the other riff based tracks on here, I think the riffs are sort of incidental. Whereas here it's like, oh, this is where the excitement of the song comes from this riff. There's nothing else to the song really other than da 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 dum dum dum, and I think that's incredibly effective. My only query about this track is, yes, I love this track. My only query about it is, again, I have no idea what it's about. I don't know what it's got to do with the theme. I don't know what's going on about.
Right.
Peter, what do you think?
Well, I didn't know what it was about until I read the lyrics, and it's just it's a brilliant metaphor for a man's life falling apart. I mean, it's a really clever idea, this. So you've got the locomotive sort of moving on, but there's no stopping the locomotive, you see, because life doesn't stop. This is what's happening to him. And as he goes down, the pistols are scraping and he's lost the handle. Old Charlie, whoever he is, has lost the handle. Maybe he's the tramp. And there's a great line. He sees his children jumping off at the stations one by one. And then so the children are either abandoning him or have, left home, or they've gone. And then his wife is off with some other bloke, but the locomotive will not stop. It keeps going. And I think that's a brilliant metaphor. This kind of, you can't control what's happening to him. I think it's the most exciting episode on the album, to be honest. It's a shame it's left so late. On the album, I really like this track. There's also a very unusual bass part. If you really listen to it, headphones on, is it Hammond? Who's the guy on bass?
Jeffrey Hammond.
Jeffrey Hammond.
Jeffrey Hammond.
He's so good they named him twice. He slides the notes. So it's doom, doom, doom. He doesn't play. It sounds like it should be staccato notes, but they slide up all the time, like something moving, like a sort of cog moving around or something. I also love the way they format it, which is the band blast, and then Ian Anderson does his bit. It really works. It's so effective that he's not fighting the band, is he? And so you really get to hear his voice, this desperation in his voice coming through, telling the story of this guy's life falling apart, and then the band put the riff in. I think that works great. The structure of it's fantastic. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, because I hadn't thought about that bass line. That's a sort of sound painting, isn't it? And I often just don't notice these things. I just think, oh, I like this track, and I don't notice the stuff that the band's saying. Well, why don't you do that? Because that sound like a train, like. I just don't even notice because I'm too focused on like whether I think the melodic development in the bridge is interesting enough.
I think though in Jeffrey Hammond's case, they said, why don't you play it like that? It sound like someone who can actually play the bass. Sorry, that was a joke based on the fact they'd never played before. So
jokes are always better when you explain them. I mean, you said that the album's going downhill a bit at this point, but actually, if an album ends well, it doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, as long as you're happy with the last two tracks, you can sit through a track or two that are a bit rubbish as long as something good's coming right afterwards. Actually, I was thinking about that. That's interesting what you were saying about life as a runaway train. I mean, that's a motif that comes back from time to time, isn't it? In sort of cinema and things like that. And actually, I was thinking that there's a famous comment from this guy Walter Benjamin, who was like a Marxist philosopher who died, committed suicide to avoid getting captured by the Nazis. And he was a sort of he was in the Frankfurt school, and he was very, he's very he's very popular now. People really like have gone back to his work and kind of reevaluated it over and over again. And there's a bit where he says that people often think that revolution, he says, is a runaway train, right? But actually, that's not right. Revolution is often like an attempt to grab the handbrake.
Ah,
So, it's this idea that like the revolution isn't the runaway train. Actually, people sometimes do revolutions because things are so out of control that they need to like take some power, take some
yeah.
control back.
Mm.
So perhaps that's there's a resonant, that's there's an echo of that here, isn't there? Again, very lovely, very interesting theme. I don't know how this is very much far beyond what most bands would be writing about, really.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Shaun, do you like this one?
Um, yeah, it's funny. It's funny actually. I'll be honest. It's probably the one that I least like on the album, and I don't know why. Because I think lyrically and the ideas behind it are great. And but there's something about it. I just find it a bit moribund or something. A bit bland. I don't know. And it does the music does sound like a train, but maybe that's what limits it. Oh, great. Sounds like a train on the way to doom. And that's about it for me. The most interesting thing are some of the lyrics. And it's have we said this one? In the stifling madness of the locomotive breath runs the all-time loser headlong to his death. I mean, it's great. It's great. It's
Brilliant.
great stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, somebody's stolen the handle, haven't they? God knows what the regulator handle, the
Yeah.
brake handle. It's the brake handle, isn't it? So, you know, um, but yeah, there's some good drum fills on it, I think, actually. Some quite nice, some of Clive Bunker's finest before he popped
Have
off to
you
join Manfred Mann.
have you guys ever seen the General by Buster Keaton, which is the whole
Yeah.
film is like a runaway train basically,
Yeah.
and all of the slapstick and the comedy comes from the fact that they can't find the handle and things like that.
Can I
It's
just
great.
ask though, Sean, you're a big
Yeah,
fan of like trains and
yeah,
steam
yeah,
engines and things.
yeah,
I mean, they were terrifying things that
yeah,
these these old machines were seriously like needed some
yeah,
serious control, didn't they? Because
yeah,
steam is
yeah,
such a powerful element, and
yeah.
everything was
That's
so
right.
mechanical at the time that the
Yeah,
idea of the locomotive is like it's a sort of it's quite scary the amount of
yeah,
power something like that actually
yeah,
has.
oh, yeah.
It's interesting the term locomotive breath, of course, because then I start thinking about Aqualung again, which is does
Mm.
he mean like someone with bad breath? But I think it just means the train, doesn't he? Has
Mm,
locomotive breath.
mm,
It's an odd
yeah,
name for the track, though, I think.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
I think it's a human reference, isn't it? Locomotive breath. It's something to do with this person that you're saying, like the person that's being described in the song. It
Mm.
actually makes me. I mean, I think perhaps it's a bit too rocky for you for you,
Well, it
Sean.
could
This
be
one,
that,
and
it's a
because I
piece
think
of hard
it's.
rock and
Mm. I mean,
yeah, I don't
because
know.
it makes me think of actually, curiously, in a sort of like lateral way, makes me think of Motorhead. Like
Oh
the
yeah,
actual name of the band, Motorhead, and I wonder whether
yeah.
they had that in their minds
Mm.
because you can imagine
Mm,
like them being a fan of this track, or in even
mm,
like Metallica had a song
mm,
Motor Breath on their first album,
mm,
which is obviously a reference to Motorhead, but it kind of
mm,
the Metallica one titled condenses both. But
mm,
this is definitely sort of hard rock. We're in hard rock territory here,
mm.
aren't we? I
Mm.
think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not knocking them.
Mm.
It's okay, but just find it personally, yeah, it's the least music, one of the least musically interesting tracks. But
Well,
I'm,
what do you
I'm, I'm
think of
obviously no, carry on.
I mean, what do you think of Sean? What do you think of the last track, Wind Up? Then
I think it
are you
ends on a bit of a
frozen?
damp squib, to be honest.
Right,
I'm
right, right.
trying to be polite about it. Um,
Mm.
do you know, I don't know, there's something about it slightly reminds me of The Wall or something like that. I don't know, that sort of um, Roger Waters style lyrics. I mean, again, I think it's a sort of riposte sort of Sunday school, isn't it?
Yeah.
That sort of Sunday school education, but and it sort of turns into a bit of a rocker at the end. Yeah, I think Peter's right. It does sort of this side too does kind of go downhill,
Yeah.
and you're on the train already, aren't you? You're on the locomotive, and you're about to hit the buffers.
Mm.
I, th I don't know. I really like side one, to be honest. I think that's great. That gets the most
Right.
needle time from me.
This is
Yeah.
turning into our last episode where we were discussing 2112, and we all sort of fell into a a funk in the second half. I think this is all right. I mean, I like this. I quite like this track. I think it's a tasteful end to the album, and I quite like the yeah. As you say, it's a little bit like a coda, isn't it? After Locomotive Breath, but I think it works quite well in that as that. I mean, my main problem with it, I think, is that this is where he's kind of summing up his view on religion.
Mm.
I mean, I haven't mentioned this so far, but I must say I don't really buy this critique of religion. I don't know what you guys feel about it. I think it's too facile, really. It's the kind of thing that everyone says now. Oh,
Yeah.
I believe in God, but I just don't believe in churches. It's like, oh God.
But
I mean,
perhaps not then, Tim. Perhaps this
well,
was
yeah,
something new then,
you might be right. Maybe.
1971.
That's right, because now that's a sort of fairly standard neo
Mm.
hippie,
Yeah,
new age view, isn't it? And you're right.
yeah,
Probably this is the early days of the hippie movement. So probably not that Jethro Tull are particularly hippie-ish, but I think that you're probably right. It was probably might have been more might have been less prevalent at that point. But there had already been lots of very interesting critiques of religion, from Nietzsche and Marx and
mm,
things like that. And then for the hippies just to come along and say, yeah, yeah, we all need spirituality, but just we don't need priests. It's just like, oh, sod off.
mm.
Because also, sorry, we're not supposed to swear, are we? But like they say, oh, I like God, but not religion. But I mean, there
Mm.
isn't God without religion, is there? I don't know. Anyway, I mean, maybe
That's
there
a
is,
whole
but
different kettle of fish.
yeah. I mean, you need some sort of, some element of like people just chatting with each other about the possible existence of a deity, because otherwise it's
Yeah,
just like what we all just literally just wander around and I don't know, like stare at the stars or something. I mean,
yeah,
I don't buy it. But I think you were saying, Sean, that it's
yeah,
more to do with like having been to a public school or something, and having to
yeah.
put up with that education system.
Sort of
Peter, what do you think
pressure.
of this final track?
I think Sean might be alluding to sort of the opening of Animals or something, the Floyd album,
Mm.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I think in a way, yeah, I'm not a big fan of this track, but I start to think of it like the White Album conundrum, which is like, could they have, could they have had an album of only one side, just with a blank on the other, and maybe just thrown some of these tracks from the second side onto the first and got rid of some on the first? I don't know. That's impossible. It would have been like an EP or something if I had it my way. What I think though is interesting is what you said earlier, Tim, about you didn't like the acoustic version of something, but when it picks up into the rock version of it, or it could have made a better rock version. This is exactly what happens on this track, which is the introduction is essentially him playing through the song, but when the guitar and drums come in, it really actually packs a punch. This song, there's something
Mm.
about it. It's the rhythm, it's the kind of syncopation of this
Yeah,
between the drums, the straight drums, and the guitar part. Sounds brilliant. I think it sounds fantastic when the band come in. Now,
yeah.
there's one other thing, which is a sort of writerly thing, which is I find it a little corny, this in the acoustic moments because of that major third chord, which was universally used by everyone in the 90s, Blur and Oasis. They love that major third chord. Apologies to anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, but it's a real jazzy kind of chord they use. And they grew me for success, that bit. I find that really corny, and it doesn't
Mm.
happen anywhere else on this album. They don't, they're much more subtle than that. And I
Yeah.
thought, oh, that sounds interesting to do it like that, doesn't it? But it's really like, I don't know, sounds really
Mm.
dated now, I think.
Yes.
But when the band come in, I really like it. And I have no problem with the ending because it's that falling off the edge of a cliff ending, which I really like. It's what I like about The Wall. It's that weird end
Mm,
where it comes back in. I think it's a clever ending.
mm.
He does that thing. I hadn't thought about that thing about the chord. Yeah, I'd have to think about that. But I think
Annoying.
he does that. Uh, what's he called? Stockhausen. He does that Stockhausen thing of like playing around with the voice, like that. He does that when he's playing the flute as well, doesn't he?
Yes.
Mm.
And he
Yeah.
does the album ends with him going, and that's like I think that's clever. That's
Yeah.
that's his sort of musicality coming through, isn't it? So it's a nice that's a nice sort of final moment for the. But again, we're clutching at straws here, aren't we? I like the last 2 seconds of this album. But I just wanted to just before we finish, I just wanted to read you a list of a few of the songs that they left off. Lick Your Fingers Clean, which is awesome. Um, what else? Um, Up the Pool, which is about going to Blackpool Beach, I think. That's a brilliant track. Life is a Long Song they left off. I mean that's a beautiful. It was they kept it as a single. Um, and then what else? Dr. Bogan Broom. That's a nice little track from later Nursey. These are all really good tracks. they could have. I
Mm.
could imagine a different track listing for this album. And just further to
Yeah.
what you were saying, Peter, about your funny comment about like could it have just been a single side? I mean, actually, they it sounds like you guys are slightly disappointed by what they chose to put on the second side, but I think it was all fairly conscious what they were doing because
Mm.
they could have had other tracks on there, but they obviously decided this was really the best running order, for better or worse. But anyway, I just say that as a sort of like final defense of the band.
I think the thing is that we never have is the context of the time, isn't it? And some things are
Mm.
just inexplicable. You just think, why hell would you do that? And you find it in the 90s on a CD, some outtrack. You think that's far better. But what you
Mm.
don't understand is the situation they're in at the time, which is they're not necessarily the only people actually involved, are they?
All
And
right.
there's other people who, say, well, no, that would be better, but well, we can't fit that on or whatever it is.
That's right. And then you're trying to make difficult programming decisions, and Jimmy Page comes in and starts waving at everybody. Like it can't be easy.
You're trying
Um,
to avoid Robert Plant.
all right, brilliant. Well, thanks a lot, lads. We'll leave it there, and we'll see you all again soon for more inconsequential discussions. And yeah, have a good evening.
Cheers.
Cheers.